So I'm Dan Reddy. As John said, you've got the bios, but I'll just go over the basics, basic titles. I'm a consultant in software assurance and supply chain risk management for the Institute of Defense Analyses, and I also teach at Thomas Edison in the graduate cybersecurity certificate program, and had the opportunity to meet one of my former students this morning, which is great. And I have a pressing question that I want us all to address, and that is, should cybersecurity be one word or two? So I'm delighted that everyone is talking about cybersecurity. For a long time, we talked about information security, and then cybersecurity started catching on, but I find book titles with two words, programs with one word, and I want us as professionals to go with the one word all the time in every case, all right? So that's
Aye.
That's your mission, to go and spread that word. So on my left here, Mikhail Falkovich is the Director of Information Security for Consolidated Edison of New York. Came all the way across the river to be with us today. I mean, can you beat this view? It's spectacular. Next is Ernest Whonig, Senior Vice President for Innovation. How cool is it to have innovation in your title? Innovation and growth and commercial practice partner for Systems I, or Systems One?
System one.
System One, Inc. And then next, Manisha MacArthur, Senior Manager at Boston Consulting Group Platinion, where she is focused on large cyber transformations, among other things. And last but not least, Kyle Foley, Service Area Manager for IBM Services Public Sector Cyber and Biometrics Service Area, which I think is also a very cool title. So I'll start with Mikhail. Our government is paying more attention to supply chain risk. In fact, last week at a meeting, it was described as the shiny new rock. Now, it's the shiny new rock that we are still pushing uphill, but everyone wants to touch it, everyone wants to be part of it. And to me, it's a long time coming. I remember when I was at EMC and people internally would say, so when's cybersecurity going to become a big thing? And I would always say, in the next 6 months. And of course, 6 months later, and then 6 months later. And then it was going to be 2015. Well, it's 2018 and it's starting to get a little more attention. So my question for Mikhail is, how do you approach the problem, especially from an industry point of view? You've got a zillion vendors, and I know the world of industry is to ask a whole bunch of questions in a questionnaire of every vendor, but then how do you deal with that? How do your peers deal with it? So can you enlighten us on how you approach supply chain?
Sure thing. So first and foremost, one word. I vote for one word, right? Cybersecurity. So to give a little bit of background, supply chain risk has been a part of our day-to-day life for a long while. Even though it's getting kind of publicity right now and it's becoming the hot thing, we've been involved in protecting the grid for a while, and we always understand that one of the easiest ways for an attacker or malicious code or malicious functions to get into us is through our vendors, right? And there are 4 attack vectors that I'll just kind of speak to, and you probably have seen a lot of this already on the news and in the public space. But how can our supply chain risk be manifested against us, right? Vulnerabilities, hardware embedded malware, software embedded malware, and compromise of trusted vendors, right? So we see a lot of that in the news right now. And as we recognize that, we build our internal programs to mitigate that risk. So in general, right, so defense in depth and defense in breadth is a strategy that I utilize whenever I talk about cybersecurity. right? So that's multiple layers of defense and multiple tools and processes and capabilities across each layer. Vendor risk assessments, right? So whenever we deal with vendors that hold our data or that we interface with, we perform vendor risk assessments on them. Cyber T's and C's, right? Make sure that your legal departments are familiar with cyber impacts and actually collaborate with the cyber team to make sure that as procurement and supply chain actually buys things, that both the legal and the cyber team is involved to assess the risk. No silos, right? So a lot of larger organizations, you have one department and another department, they don't talk to each other. Well, from a cybersecurity perspective, that's not a positive environment, right? You want to make sure that whenever anyone talks about utilizing a new technology or a new system that they're building, where they're utilizing vendors, or even if they're building it themselves, that those functions are brought to IT or to information security to evaluate wholesale. So there's a catch-all to make sure that cyber risk is addressed, and just in general, technology risk is addressed. So you mentioned, what are we doing as an industry? So we cannot solve all of these problems by ourselves. So we have to partner, right? We have to partner not only with the other peers, which we do within the energy industry, but also with the government, right? So, and other institutions, right? So there are many partners, both peers, partners that provide us information, and government to come together to solve this problem. It's not enough to do it just by ourselves. We have to reach out and communicate. So who's familiar that their near supply chain standards drafting team has finished their work, and under the NERC SIP regulations, a new standard is almost ready to come out. So NERC has drafted the supply chain standards, SIP 13, and that has been now proposed to FERC, and FERC is evaluating it right now. So hopefully in a couple of months we'll have additional regulation for supply chain risk. And it's more of a plan and some terms and conditions language, but there are some technical requirements there as well. So it's a very, very good step forward.
So if I could just pick up on that point, some people in the industry have said that the NERC SIP requirements are primarily a compliance regime, and they don't really improve security. So you've seen both sides of that? What do you say?
All right, so I believe that the NERC SIP standards, even though they do bring on a significant burden of compliance, they kind of draw the line in the sand and provide a minimal requirement for all of the industry that supports bulk electric transmission assets, or that has bulk electric transmission assets, to actually implement them. You must meet this minimal level of security controls. I don't think it's just compliance. I really do believe that there is a security benefit to the standards. And it also makes everybody play the same game, right? So that means that anyone can be audited to the requirements, and that means that everyone has to have the same controls, or a similar type of controls implemented. The standards they provide some flexibility as to how to implement controls, but yet they draw that line in the sand that you must have a program, you must secure.
I see two other benefits. One, it helps with awareness throughout the utility that there's this entity that we have to pay attention to, and also senior executives realize that there's a cost to ignoring it, and therefore you have a way to go after improvements.
Correct. So unlike in many other industry and in many other sectors, the utility industry has mandated standards. So they're not voluntary. So if we actually fail, the implications can be significant from a monetary perspective.
Okay. Ernest, you have innovation in your title. So what is the potential impact of the recent and upcoming innovations in technology? Larry mentioned IoT, obviously cloud. It's been here for a while. Everyone's talking about AI being a new part of our cyber risk. So how do you put all of those new innovations together in terms of risk and how they impact our sector? And how do we prepare to maximize the value that we get from these technologies but minimize the risk?
And I'll define the size of the universe at the same time. Great. Okay, so first of all, I need to apologize to Mikhail because I'm gonna say something that kind of I have less faith in the NERC SIPs in some regards.
SIP stands for Critical Information Protection, if you're not familiar with the
With the term.
electric industry.
So one of the things in regards to the, because I was the deputy CISO, before System 1, I was the deputy CISO and board advisor for AES Corporation. So none of this goes to AES, by the way, so, but I just give that reference because I've worked for a large energy company, which is where my reference comes from.
Move the mic a little
Sure. The fact is that, we have a problem in regards to how we're managing cybersecurity. We have a number of problems, but the big one for me is that, especially when you look at infrastructure, whether it be energy, water, even business operations and manufacturing, in a lot of cases, we are trying to manage 21st century problems with 50-year-old management processes, or in some cases, 100-year-old infrastructures. That breeds a lot of issues. Electric sector is one example of that. If you look at how NERC SIP progressed and the time frames involved in regards to getting NERC SIP from one version to another, we're talking about years in some cases, and well, in a lot of cases. And in those when we talk about years in regards to managing technology problems and management problems, new business structures problems, basically it doesn't work. What we've seen is we continue to fall farther and farther behind in how we manage things like risk in the business environment. In particular, we call it cyber risk, but in my mind, it's risk. I have the privilege of developing, and when we get to finish teaching the risk course for the grad program at Thomas Edison, and I think Larry brought up some very interesting points in regards to how we are going to incentivize. Part of the issue we have right now is that we don't incentivize. We don't know how to incentivize because we haven't done a good job in regards to looking and finding the problem. And we aren't doing that with the problem we have at hand right now, which is basically a current infrastructure. Again, in some cases, is 100 years old. If you look at the telecom infrastructure, you're still talking 30 to 40 years old. If you're talking about, then we're talking about layering on cloud on top of that. Then we talk about how we're going to plug everything into the Internet of Things and IoT. And now in the last couple of years, we're saying, okay, well, we're going to make it all work with AI. So the balls we are now going to be throwing up in the air in regards to how we are going to manage cybersecurity in a risk structure within a operating environment, both whether it's a utility or whether it's a retail organization or whether it is a manufacturer. We have a lot of work ahead of us in regards to how we are going to have to solve these problems. I don't have a lot of the problem solved, but we at least have identified some of the issues. What we haven't done is actually figure out how we're going to work those issues. So workforce, for example. Thomas Edison solving part of that problem. I was happy to hear the CISO for New Jersey talking about that issue as well as acting sort of as a feeder organization. Part of the solution for that also is going to be we have to let go. As businesses, we're going to have to let go of the cyber operations activities and say, you know what, we can't do that in-house. We're a utility. We pump electrons. We're a internet company. We're Amazon. We don't do cybersecurity. There's a company over there. They do cybersecurity great. That's their job. We need to go to them and say, okay, do our cybersecurity. Figure out how we are going to, through third-party management, through distributed contract partnerships, shared services, however, we need to figure out how we can basically concentrate those capabilities and then leverage them instead of saying, oh no, we're going to spread this thin layer of cyber professionals, which we don't have enough of across all of our industries, and somehow that's going to solve the problem. We're sticking fingers in dikes and going, da, 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 da. What we need to do is basically figure out who's going to build the better wall. and actually that's not the analogy I even want to give because walls are not the right thing, but who's going to actually build?
Walls are controversial.
Walls are controversial, exactly. I think about it in terms of cavalry. You know, the Roman Empire fell apart towards the end of their period because they couldn't defend all the borders. The last couple hundred years, the only way they survived was basically that they got this bright idea and said, oh, well, we're going to have this group here and this group here, and we'll respond. We've gotten to that point. It's now about understand there's going to be a breach. What little wall we have is going to be hit, and they're going to come over. So the question is, how do we respond? How do we prepare to respond? How do we ensure that those resources are developed and adequately put in place? How do we manage that? There's so many incidents in regards to Ukrainian incident from 2 years ago, the Target incident of, all the cases where things have been handled badly because they didn't have an incident response plan, they didn't follow the incident response plan, they didn't think through what it actually meant if they were actually going to fail. We have to understand we are going to fail. That's hard. To say, basically, especially a consultant, it's hard to go in and say, you're going to fail. But in the end, you're better for it because what that means is you have the ability to respond then. And you do those things we've talked about in regards to preparing the board, responding, making sure they're prepared, making sure they're doing their due diligence. All that falls into the how do we deal with the problem.
So what do you think of Larry's comment that your attacker knows your response plan and they use that against you?
Your attacker knows, well, first of all, yeah, I mean, that's probably true somewhere. It's true in some places, not true in others. But that doesn't mean you don't plan.
Right.
If I'm going to basically say, oh, I will give you a prime example. I actually had a CIO of a major company inform me at one point, as I was advising her, that about encrypting the database for their financial system, just an example. The response I got back was, well, we don't even know what's in there ourselves. Why am I worried about someone else being able to get in there? I'm like, okay, obviously my words are wasted here at this point, because that's the kind of mentality that some people have in regards to this, and that's unacceptable. And the board then needs to basically take control and say, no, that is unacceptable. That is bad for shareholder value. That thinking, that's a cultural issue. So the fact is we can't just go, oh, we're going to be attacked. They might know what we're doing, therefore we can't plan. No, plan. Because even if they know what you're doing, for example, they may know that, okay, your response in this case is this. Okay, fine. But guess what? You still have to plan about, okay, if they brick all the assets in my data center, then what do I do? Who do I talk to? How do I order? Who actually is responsible? Where's the data? When I have to respond, I still have to know what data I've lost and what needs to be replaced or what I need to report based on that. All of that still is in play, whether they've got a hold of my contingency plan or not.
Okay. Manisha, as the pace of attacks increase, how should we best position ourselves? And if you have time, how do you measure cyber resilience?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to pull this a little bit closer just
Yep,
because
good.
I can't really project today. So most of my experience has been in the consulting area for the past 11 years. So my background is primarily in financial services. So that's what I will be talking about today. But outside of having the best cyber tools or the most sophisticated security operations center, I do think there is a significant amount of value in organizations understanding what their key risks and vulnerabilities are. A very good baseline foundation is using the NIST framework, ISO, CIS Top 20. They're all fantastic to get you to that 80-20 rule. But where I have seen financial services in particular go above and beyond is when they start focusing and actually going beyond the parameters of a methodology or a framework. So I can talk to you about what I've seen from the top 5 or the top 10 banks who have really good hygiene, and then they start to expand their boundaries with the budget that they have. So first of all, it's understanding their top key assets that are at risk. A lot of companies tend to focus on taking a one-size-fits-all approach, and with the top banks, I've seen them go above and beyond here. They'll have very robust inventories of what they consider to be their most critical assets, and they have a very interesting program to actually protect those. What I haven't seen done so well is taking a layered approach to that type of security. So understanding the vulnerabilities at the network layer, the servers, all the toolage that would tie up to a payment system, for example, and the IoT. I still think that's still a little too new for financial services. They're working on it, but I haven't seen a good fit for it yet. So something that I'm doing with BCG is actually doing research with MIT labs. They have a systems-based theory that Nancy Levison, a professor at MIT, came out with, and she focused on industrial systems and understanding why, with the controls in place today, do accidents and hazards still happen. So we're trying to use that same approach and apply it to cyber to erase the kind of the 20% negative after you hit the 80-20 rule. So a good example of this, the NASA Space Challenger accident that happened several years ago now, when they went through traditional analysis, what they found was it was an O-ring that was faulty. That's exactly what they found. But when they used this new approach done by MIT, they found that the NASA's management team was actually under severe political and financial pressure to reduce cost. So they went with a low-cost provider that had a known flaw in the O-ring. And there's tons of studies on this. There's books and articles written about it. But what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between not just focusing on technology in financial services, but branching out, understanding the human element, understanding the process breakdowns that might occur that would actually result in an attack. A lot of the stuff that happens today, not Petya, WannaCry, it's all very hygiene related, right? And it could have been prevented by proper training or improvement in process controls. So that's really what I'm trying to focus on right now in terms of the industry. And I see the more sophisticated corporations going in that direction. So the question about cyber resilience then, how
And measuring it, yeah.
measuring cyber resilience. I have seen tons of KPIs and metrics programs, some that work, some that don't work so well. I even had an organization that had 300 metrics that they were trying to risk measure from a cyber resilience perspective, and only 10 of them were something they could actually calculate. But what I found the best measure of resilience to be is actually conducting tabletop exercises. So actually going and putting yourself through a real live simulation of threats that might be posed to your organization and learning from that. So something my MD says really well is that you can't learn golf by reading a PowerPoint deck, right? And in the same way, you can't really be prepared for an incident or a business continuity type of situation by reading a 50-page document on what to do when it actually occurs. I think it's about consistent, organized action planning to actually simulate those exercises, not at the leadership team, but also at the board level, so they can deal with the media and deal with their customers and know how to respond adequately. And taking measures from that, how do they actually improve? Setting KPIs to that level.
Great.
Yeah.
So we have Bill Newhouse, who's going to speak in the next panel, and I had the opportunity to hear Bill talk about the NICE framework last week when we had a session in DC on workforce. So I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I was very impressed that the NICE framework outlines 52 work roles, but how do they translate into the jobs that people need the most? So the idea is that 52 work roles are not necessarily single job descriptions for an individual. One individual may have 3 roles and you advertise for it. And it seems to me that one of the things that's missing in our industry is some standardization as to what the titles are that people are interested in. So what do you think the industry needs most? Are they network skills, defense countermeasures, analyses, supply chain risk, understanding the business aspects, forensics? How do you see the work roles?
All of those. But first, cybersecurity is one word. Spread the word. And fix your spell check so it sees it as one word. But I'm all for that.
I've actually accomplished something today. This is great.
Right. What did you learn today? So, no, I think all of those really. Cybersecurity. What I love about it, it's a very broad field. And so all of those areas that you mentioned need to be part of your cybersecurity program. And linking business to cyber is very important. Now, at IBM, we solve business problems for our clients. I think everybody here would agree that cybersecurity is a business problem. So I think first and foremost, everybody has to have strong business skills. I think you have to be able to understand risk. You have to understand the business that you're supporting. And as important, you need to understand the sector that you are supporting as well. Sorry, thank you. You do need to understand the sector that you're working in as well. I think that that really helps your cybersecurity program. If you're in a healthcare industry, you're running a cybersecurity program for a hospital, I think it's very helpful that you have somebody with experience in the healthcare industry, as an example. Same with financial services, same with defense, same with, the federal government has some unique requirements. So that's something I think that is fundamental. I think is, risk management and business skills. So your cybersecurity curriculum, I think, should include, basic business classes as well as the technology classes as well. I'm sure your program addresses that. But in addition to business skills, there are various technical skills that we find that our clients and our solutions require. And so I thought I would just go through the solutions that we have in my practice at IBM. We're the cybersecurity and biometrics practice in the public sector in global business services at IBM. And so we have a governance and regulatory compliance solution, and of course you need to know what regulations that your client has to comply with when you work in that area. And that is a broad solution, so you need a strong general technology background as well to work in that space. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is a hot topic right now. It's not as much so in the public sector, it's certainly in the federal space as it is in the commercial sector. But May 25th is the drop-dead date for GDPR, so that is a hot topic, and I know at IBM we are doing what we can to make sure that all of our contracts and all of our businesses comply with GDPR. So we're working towards that. We have an application and data security solution. So, there we're looking for people with knowledge of development, of coding, and vulnerability scanning of source code. So things like using IBM AppScan is a tool, or Fortify. And then on the database side, database monitoring, we're looking for people with those skills as well. IBM has a tool, Guardium, and Imperva is another product. So we're looking for people with skills like that as well. You can learn the tools, so you need to be able to learn the tools, but sometimes our clients will specifically tell us, we want somebody who knows the tool that they have. So we can sometimes get people in because we tell them they can learn that tool quickly. But that is a direction that we find for certain of our solutions. We have an infrastructure and endpoint security solution, and IBM has an endpoint security product, Big Fix, and we're also looking for people with firewall experience. We're looking at infrastructure and endpoint security. Our Security Intelligence and Operations Center, solution that we run a SOC for several different federal agencies, and we look for people who know how to do deep. I know Larry was talking about analytical skills. That's really important. We have tools like Splunk for security intelligence. We have IBM QRadar. Some of our clients use that tool. We use Nessus for scanning networks. That seems to be very prominent in the federal space. Nessus is a very, very, very popular network security, network scanning tool. So we're looking for people with those skills. But in that area, when you're working in a SOC, I think in addition to knowing the technology, you have to have good analytical skills and a business sense of what's a risk, because there's so many risks. You got to know what's most important for your business. So I would say that. Sorry, go ahead.
How would you answer the question that someone raised earlier for Michael in terms of entry-level positions? We've described a lot of things of where you're looking for existing skills. Are there avenues for entry-level positions?
There are, and we do hire some students right out of college, so they're not only are they new to cybersecurity, but they're pretty new to the workforce. We do struggle with finding projects in some cases where the clients will accept them, because when we're in the services business, so clients pay for our services, and they do often want to see people that have have experience. Now, certifications is something that they ask for a lot too, but certifications, a lot of them, you have to pass the test, but you also have to have a certain number of years of experience in order to get the certification. So that's another thing. So we do hire people if they have the right education and the right background. We do hire people. So I do believe there are opportunities out there. Just keep looking for them because it's a great field, but it is a challenge, and I do totally understand where they're coming from there.
So if someone knows that cybersecurity is one word, they get a leg in the door?
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. Capital C.
Okay, so we have a mic up here. I have a few more questions for them, but I want to make sure that you folks have an opportunity to ask our distinguished panel some questions. So raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you if you've got a question.
Well, first of all, I've got to, Joe Jarzamek with Synopsys. I have to commend the panelists who are talking about where industry's stepping forward as self-regulating, as opposed to waiting for bad things to happen and the government will come in and regulate. Because government really doesn't want to regulate unless bad things continue to happen. It's viewed that industry is not self-regulating. So that's very good. But going into the issue of when people bring up issues, you use the Challenger Act. Actually, that was a case where NASA chose to make it a management decision as opposed to safety. Because it used to be with NASA, a safety engineer could raise the safety flag and stop things. But NASA turned it around and said, you must prove that the accident's going to occur. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and let it go. Now, in cybersecurity, that's even more challenging. Proving that a bad thing's going to happen, to say you should take preventative things, is harder to prove. I did that with Kaspersky Labs, challenging DHS. You shouldn't be acquiring that. 4 years later, they put out a binding operational directive. Oh, that was bad. You can't install that. It's just like they were warned, but acquisition said it's cheap. You know what? They would have given it away. But so how do we address that, given the fact that you can't typically prove that a security incident is going to occur, but you can talk about what the preventative type of stuff is?
So anyone want to take that? Just grab the mic and get it close to you.
I can go first, but in terms of, so that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're doing this research with MIT Labs. We're putting a use case together to explore the management and the human and the process-related aspect of it. I don't have a good answer for you yet, but to be honest, I think that we will eventually, because a large component of why we're doing this is to justify spend, right? A lot of boards, they get a ton of money to say, you know, X millions of dollars, go do something with it, but show me the return on investment. And that's not an easy thing to prove. So this is one of the reasons why we're actually going down this route of exploring things outside technology.
So I'll maybe put out three things. So one is leadership at the top, right? So just as with safety, right? So the leadership at the top needs to set the example, saying safety above all else. So now I think there's a recognition that cyber is one of the top risks that any organization has. Right? Everybody's so embedded now with technology that you can't really run any business without reliance on technology. And with technology comes the risk of cyber. So that should be one of the top risks for any organization. The other thing that I'll say is I think proving the negative of saying, hey, it's not going to happen to us is actually much easier now. I'm going to take a different perspective, right? So there's two ways to do it, right? If you're going to do your risk management exercise and you're going to say, how many times has this happened in the past, right? Now let's say that you in your organization it hasn't happened, right? But the idea is that you can now look outside, and I'm almost in a position where there's like a daily breach going on, right? So if you're not seeing a breach notification in the newspaper, then you're not reading the newspaper. So whether it's your boards or your senior leadership, you should be able to point to the Ukraine example that was mentioned earlier. You're able to point to other companies that have been breached that had significant impacts to their bottom lines based on cybersecurity. And at that point, I mean, we're there, right?
Right. It's no longer if, it's when.
Yeah, and now the question is, it's not, I don't have to prove that it happened to me. I have to just show that it's happening all over the place, and it's a much easier conversation. But I would say that getting that tone at the top is very, very crucial.
Yeah, just to add real quick on that. I think it's an excellent point in regards to, up until now, when you look at it, for example, cyber insurance. the idea has basically, oh, great idea, but, insurance is based on actuary tables, all this data that we've had over 100 years in regards to, how long I'm going to live based on these characteristics, how much you're going to live for this. We're finally getting to the point where we're getting the data points that we need in order to make some of those discussion to have some of those discussions from a risk standpoint when it comes to cybersecurity, which goes to Mikhail's point about the fact that you can look outside now. Because it used to be, I remember and I'm sure you got this as well, talking to anyone in operations in an electric company. Well, give me an example where that ever really happened. Well, in Ukraine happened, and suddenly it was like this. Suddenly I had the European subsidiary COO's ear like you wouldn't believe. So the fact is that we're finally getting to a point where, and this goes to the whole thing talking about innovation earlier, we're finally, IoT, advancement of systems, and AI, all those together are finally getting us to the point where we can do the statistical analysis that we couldn't do before. We're able to sort of pull that data points in, run through the algorithms, if you will, and actually come up with some fairly decent answers in regards to, yeah, this is an issue. And importantly, stop thinking about it as cybersecurity. Start thinking about it, this is the business risk to you. This is how much it's going to cost us in the bottom line, because that's what the COO wants to know. What do you mean my plant's going to be down for 3 days or a week or whatever? Suddenly that's real numbers to him. Or, we're going to be in violation of NERC, SIP rule regulations for a month. My God, that's $25,000 a day. I mean, $250,000 a day. What are we going to do? We got to fix that. So suddenly, risks prevention looks a lot more inviting.
Yeah, if you could set up a risk culture or develop a risk culture in your enterprise, I think that goes a long way for addressing, getting the attention of the senior leaders, understanding the risks.
Incidentally, because you mentioned cyber insurance, Larry Clinton and I did a presentation at the RSA conference on cyber insurance and assurance. So if you look for both of our names and search for it, you can see the PowerPoint. So another question over here.
Dave Christensen, ADP. I'm with their software and infrastructure engineering group. So I just got involved with IT security the last 5 years, and I noticed doing some mentoring with some universities on cyber. And there's a huge challenge on cyber education in New Jersey and then hiring. How do we attack that and solve that problem together?
So I'll take a shot at that. So universities right now are developing multiple cybersecurity programs. So Thomas Edison is one. Rutgers is another. They've just started a cybersecurity program. So as long as we as industry participants and experts take part and support these organizations and these programs, I think we will go a long way. I'll just leave it at that.
I think a good approach could be if there's a way to have incentives for companies to train people who know the business in cybersecurity, so that creates a career path from within. Because it's expensive and it's hard to get the right people from the outside, look inside and look into work with your human resources in developing a program, within your organization to train people.
And I think also that we need to start looking at the European model in regards to getting away from you have to have a degree, or at least you have to have a 4-year degree in order to work in cybersecurity. Okay, let's talk about the whole concept of internships. Let's talk about the concept of job training. Let's talk about the concept of, Thomas Edison, for example, the graduate program we're doing is basically greening the graduate program actually allows to take operational guys and put them in the cyber environment, saying, okay, you already know the business. You're already 3/4 of the way there. Let's talk about the other side of the problem, which is, the technical and the process risk issues. The other thing in regards to that is that, veterans, for example, that was mentioned earlier, former veteran myself, well, technically, I guess I shouldn't say former, I am a veteran myself. The Air Force trained me in information warfare, so I mean, I got a great job out of my 7 years. So, we need to be looking more in regards to that. And then also we need to be looking at, as we transition, this is the innovation piece, NOx and SOx are beginning to fade away. Companies are going to own less and less of those. Guess what? All those system administrators, all of those network operators, administrators, those guys already know half the problem. So we need to start turning them from NOC guys or NOC people to SOC people or security people. So there are ways to do this. We have to be a little creative, and we have to think outside the box of, no, we're going to stamp and print, an undergraduate every year to solve each of these problems. We're not going to produce 2 million of them. I mean, I think it's the last number is what we need. So the time, in order to do that, we're going to have to take some repackage. We're going to have to take some, we'll create new. We'll take some that, basically, oh, well, you already understand this. Okay, we'll basically give you on-the-job training. It's going to be the sort of this all-the-above type of selection.
I was just going to follow up really quickly on something that Ernest said about how the European model for workforce is really different. And I spent about 2 years there, and we had a lot of people that came in, a lot of young people come in after high school graduation. They didn't necessarily know what they wanted to do in college, and it was a mutually beneficial relationship for the organizations that hired them because they got them cheaper, and the individuals were actually happy. They learned and they grew, and we spent more time to actually coach and train them, and they grew into the cybersecurity space. That model, to my knowledge, does not exist in America, and I think that would be an interesting thing to see if we could move to that model. But that is one option.
And that's going to mean a major change in how we credential.
Yes.
Do you have the microphone? Where's the mic? Oh, he's
Over
next.
here. Yeah.
And then
So I guess larger enterprise do understand the risk, but the SMB space is really low-hanging fruit. And somehow there's not much awareness in the small and mid-sized businesses. Have you guys seen any kind of awareness, or what could be done from the government side or from just somebody else?
I'm gonna talk from financial services really quick. I know you guys will have more comments in other industries, but in the financial services industry, we're working with the BITS Roundtable, the Financial Services Roundtable, to harmonize all the different regulations from a U.S. and, well, I would say North American perspective. And this is tiered so that it focuses not just on the Sector 9 organizations or the top largest. It goes down to mid-tier and the small banks, and it goes through all layers, so it is applicable to all of them. It is public. It's going to help organizations ultimately understand what they should protect. It doesn't have to be everything based on the size of their organization, but at least in FS, they are moving in that direction to help SMB orgs.
Okay, I think you were next, but he stole the microphone, so make it quick. And
Well, I didn't steal it. They did it to me. My question is really for Ernest. From what you had said, I got the sense that you're advocating that larger enterprise organizations outsource their cybersecurity to other companies that are specifically in that arena. Is that what you're saying, or did I miss it?
Yes, you're correct. And I'm happy to have the discussion with anyone in regards to counterpoints. Like everything, there's plus and minuses. My major point in regards to my major advocacy of that is both for large business and for small business. Because if you think about this, most companies, their business is not operations, not network operations, not security. It is, whether it's pumping electricity, pumping electrons, whether it is selling products, whether it's the manufacturing floor, building things, widgets, whatever. The core of their business is that. Their core business is not finance. For example, most businesses, especially large businesses, they don't do their own data networks. They hire someone from that. They don't run their own, they hire Oracle. They hire SAP in regards to the financial systems. For the most part, we've gotten away from the model of we are going to have everything in-house and we're going to run it in-house. And there's a reason for that. Basically, it's not their core competency. And for large businesses, it makes economic sense to do this because again, when I was at AES, for example, we understood we're an energy company. We're not going to attract the best and brightest in regards to cybersecurity, because guess what? Those guys are going to go off and do something else for someone else who actually is focusing on cybersecurity. They're not going to want to sit around and do, our stuff. So what you have is basically, in most cases, with larger businesses, you should, in my mind, and again, we can talk about this, is that you want to have a core capability from a management and process standpoint of understanding these are the core issues in regards to our business. These are how we handle contracts. This is how we manage operations overall. This is the cyber management process issues involved. But for the most part, when it comes to, okay, are we going to run a SOC ourselves? No, let's have company X do that, because guess what? They do it for, and I know that the NERC has issues with this, so we'll leave the utility industry out. But the fact of the matter is, it's all about control. We need to understand that control can be managed through contract. It can be managed through business processes. We've been doing it for years. Cybersecurity is a business risk. We manage business risks every day through internal processes, through our chief risk officers, through our chief supply officers. The fact that we keep saying, and I've been in cybersecurity for 20 plus years, so it's hard for me to say we're not special, but we're not special. In reality, give me 1 second to finish. So that's for the large business. Now let's talk about the small businesses. Small businesses, in some cases, they have one guy. How can you have one guy who's an expert in your network security, in regards to your supply security, in regards to your network, your incident response capability? There's no way. So what you're doing there is just setting yourself up for failure, saying, oh no, we're going to have one guy. Guess what? Hire, and by the way, also, that guy's, you break him up into different pieces to do these different things. Well, guess what? I can hire a company like, say FireEye. I can hire a company or another company that does incident response capabilities. I can hire those, and they will manage it for me. As long as I hold them to the line, as long as I'm telling them, these are your requirements, this is how it has to be set, this is what has to be done, and basically I have to answer to a board. We do that all the time. Even, for example, in the utility industry. We don't run pipelines. We're supplied by someone else. So you can't tell me that, oh, well, we can't manage it from a security standpoint because it'll cause a failure of the business. Well, then why aren't you managing your supply line all the way back to an oil field or to a coal field in West Virginia? It doesn't make sense from that perspective. And so I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to chime in a little bit. So I agree with Ernest that there are opportunities for outsourcing, and if you're the small guy and you don't have the resources and you don't consider that that is a core business function for you, to absolutely consider outsourcing. There is opportunities for both outsourcing the whole thing and also augmenting your staff with others, right? That being said, I believe it is to the business's benefit to determine what is and what is not a core function. So as I mentioned earlier, right, IT and technology is becoming more and more crucial to the core business function of the utility, of finance, of any business out there. So if you were choosing to think of your IT as not your core business, I would cause you to ask you to reconsider. And with IT as being your core business, you now have to make a determination. Is my NOC, my operations center, my core business? Is my cybersecurity my core business? If it is one of my top risks, should I be outsourcing it wholesale, or should I have more of a, my thumb on the pulse? So I agree there are instances where outsourcing is appropriate, and I'm sure Kyle will agree with me on that. But
yes, and a big chunk of corporate America and across the globe do outsource cybersecurity as a service to IBM, and we do different things for different people, whether it's a SOC or we're monitoring their entire network, or we're just doing endpoint security, or we're just doing application security. But yes, it is successfully outsourced by as a service, similar, it's just like a cloud service if you're looking at infrastructure. So it is done successfully, and there are real economies of scale there, and I think that's an important driver is cost.
yeah, but once again, I believe it's up to the business to determine what is core to your business and what you choose to use outside help for.
Yes, going back to the European model of hiring job candidates for cybersecurity roles, what would you recommend for people looking for these jobs to display? I know you mentioned that they don't necessarily need a college education, and a good example of this would be Marcus Hutchins, also known as Malware Tech, who created the sinkhole that stopped the WannaCry from infecting other hosts. What would you recommend that job candidates do to portray their skills and knowledge if they don't necessarily have certifications or an educational background?
You go ahead. I've been talking way too much.
I mean, at least when I was in Europe, there wasn't a set criteria. It was having some level of IT background. If you had summer internships, that's great. But it was really, because they're young, because they're right out of high school, it was just about having the desire to learn and work hard. I mean, I don't, after college, yes, there are probably some stricter guidelines around what a candidate should display from a qualities perspective. But right out of high school, it was just, this is the salary we're offering. They were on band levels in Europe, and if you can come in and help support this function at an analyst level, we'll train you. And then you would upskill, they'd learn, and they'd evolve, and then take on more senior roles in cybersecurity department. But
Yeah, and just to add a little bit in regards to that, most schools today offer some sort of programming, at the high school level even, or online. I think if someone's really wants to do this and interested in this, I would build a portfolio based on, look, I understand I'm a high school graduate, but you know what, I took this online class that taught me about these aspects of programming, so I understand the concept that we're dealing with here in regards to how do we secure an application, for example, or at least understand how an application works. The other thing, as we talked about, is, and this is not on the individual, this is on us as corporate America, is that we've got to do a better job in interns. How do we build interns? Or how do we train interns, I guess? Like, I think earlier was a comment about, taking them to coffee or having them do coffee and paperwork. Well, no, that we need to do a better job about giving real valuable skills to people as they come on board. This is one area where I think government actually has a bigger part to play, actually, because if you look in Germany, I spent a year in Germany just recently, and they do a very good job in regards to, and I'm generally not a big advocate of government involvement, but this is one case where I think government incentives actually work.
Okay, a quick story. I've got a student not at Thomas Edison, but at my community college, is taking a course that prepares for Security Plus. And part of my feedback to him has been, you're not writing clearly in terms of what you're doing. He wants to dive in, do all these practice exploits and everything else. And I give him feedback on his writing and presentation of his results. And he sort of surfaced this notion of, what is this, an English course? But not to pick on a student, but I think it shows, especially if you start going back into high school, where people may have the inclination and the skills to do the technical side, but they may not appreciate what's necessary from a presentation and a packaging point of view, and developing some of their business skills as well. So I just want to thank our panel, so we can move on with the program. Thank you very much.